Thank you, Misty. Those were very kind remarks. I just want to say that I love CCE and I am so honored to be a part of it and to be involved in this Chief Judge Forum tonight. So I know you don't want to hear about me, so I want to move on with the reason that we're all here tonight. First, I want to start with a bit about how the DC Superior Court's Chief Judge is selected. After Chief Judge Anita Josie Herring announced her intention to retire this fall, and please, let's take a moment to thank the Chief for her service over the last 4 years. So after she announced her retirement, the independent DC Judicial Nomination Commission issued a notice of vacancy. The commission invited applications from the sitting Superior Court judges to succeed her for up to a 4-year term. Ultimately, it will be the commission that will designate the chief judge from among the 2 applicants, but there is a role for the public. The commission invites comments regarding each judge seeking designation as chief judge. The deadline for submitting comments is June 20th. The commission has an online survey which you can also print to submit in hard copy, or you can submit a letter. I encourage everyone to provide comments. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome the 2 judicial candidates for Chief Judge here with us tonight, Judges DeMayo and Judges Lee. And welcome and thank you for being with us. In the interest of time, I will not read each judge's impressive bios. Rather, condensed versions are in your program, and you can read a longer version along with their statement of interest for the chief judge role on the JNC website. Now, a bit about how the forum will work tonight. We will proceed in 3 parts. First, each judge will make a brief 3-minute opening statement. We will proceed alphabetically. Next, I will ask the judges to respond to a series of questions about their priorities and views about the role of the chief judge and how they would handle some of the important issues facing the court. The judges will have up to 2 minutes for each response. The questions were developed by all of the co-sponsoring organizations as well as members of this audience who submitted some great questions when they registered. Now, while it is uncomfortable for any trial lawyer to ever interrupt a judge, I will do so to hold them strictly to our time limits for our responses so as to ensure fairness in time, but I can't say that I won't enjoy it. The judges and I will be able to see the time cards with 30-second and 10-second reminders and then time's up. So on occasion, I may be cutting the judges off as respectfully as possible. Finally, each judge will get to make a brief closing statement. Now, those are the 3 parts for the evening. So now, with that introduction, I would ask Judge DeMayo, I'm going to turn it over to you to make your opening statement.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me through the microphone? No. It's the microphone on. Can we test the microphone? Okay. I can, yes. Happy to do that. First, I want to thank CCE for hosting this event tonight. And also, I want to thank all of the co-sponsors for making this event possible. I want to acknowledge our current Chief Judge, Anita Josie Herring, who has certainly set a high bar. I've noticed a number of my colleagues here from the bench, and I'm glad to see them participating as well. It is really an honor to appear here alongside Judge Lee. My name is Marisa DeMayo. I was born here in DC to a Puerto Rican mother and an Italian father who met and married here in the District of Columbia. They did raise us in Dale City, Virginia, but they always stayed connected to the city. And for the last 30 years, I've lived in the District of Columbia in a variety of neighborhoods, including Shaw Cardozo, Brookland, and Shepherd Park. There was an emphasis in my upbringing that is to serve others, in particular those who are disadvantaged and discriminated against. I have spent the last 36 years working in the public interest, and my focus has been to seek opportunities where I can make a difference where I can focus on making a fair society and fair outcomes for different communities. Whether it's been through litigating in the courts, whether it's been through lobbying the legislature, petitioning the executive branch, and more recently as a judge. I began my career as a paralegal, not knowing if I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I would check it out first. And I worked at the Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice, doing voting rights. In law school, I continued my public interest work, working on behalf of migrant farm workers in Texas, on behalf of people living with AIDS in New York City, low-wage workers in California, and also I worked on behalf of the LGBT community. After that, I returned to DC and I worked in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, again, doing employment litigation, suing public employers for discrimination in employment practices, focusing on police departments, correctional departments, and fire departments and sheriff's departments. I then worked at the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, MALDEF, a national Latino civil rights organization, and I headed their policy office, working on a variety of civil rights issues. I worked as an assistant United States attorney in DC, and there I prosecuted criminal cases on behalf of and fighting for the victims of those crimes, as well as working with witnesses. The victims and the witnesses were indigent people of color, and I worked closely with them in the community. In addition, I taught as an adjunct professor at 2 of the local law schools, and since 2007, I've served as a judge on the Superior Court. I have always looked for ways that I could promote access to justice, more public confidence in the courts, racial equity, and cultural competence. My interest in serving as the Chief Judge is deeply rooted in my commitment to our community. I wish to pursue this passion to serve the DC residents, and doing so with judges, administrators, and staff, so that we can fulfill the mission of the court, open to all, trusted by all, and justice for all.
Thank you, Judge DeMille. Next, we'll hear from Judge Lee.
So good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and spending time with us. I want to start by thanking all of the sponsors, but certainly the Council for Court Excellence. Chief Judge Josie Herring, we got to give you a big nod. You got us through a very tough time in court. You put us on an incredibly solid foundation. For that, we should all be incredibly thankful to you. But I also want to acknowledge my friend Judge DeMille, who's been a respected jurist for many years and made a significant contribution to the court. Ladies and gentlemen, just a little bit about my journey. I'm born in the District of Columbia. I'm educated in the District of Columbia, but I've truly been raised in the Superior Court. I was fortunate that when I finished my law school career, I worked for the greatest criminal defense firm in the country, the Public Defender Service of the District of Columbia. And once I finished there, I went on to teaching. I taught at Georgetown, I taught at Howard, and I still teach at UDC today. There's some students here that are so pleased that you put this forum together, because it means they didn't have class tonight. I've spent 26 years in the Superior Court, ladies and gentlemen, as a hearing commissioner, magistrate judge, an associate judge, and a presiding judge. I have a career that demonstrates a commitment to and dedication to the cause of justice, the court, and the citizens of this great city. I've worked across this entire justice landscape. I've collaborated with partners, and I've made every effort to engage with the community so that we can get a better sense of how the justice we dispense impacts the people that we serve. I know that I'm biased. Superior Court is a great place. It is a fine institution. But ladies and gentlemen, we cannot do it in a vacuum. We need to collaborate. We need to work with partners. And part of my goal, if I am the next Chief Judge, is to develop a coalition of partners who will recognize that we come from different places, we have different clients, but we share a common goal of trying to get justice dispensed in the fairest way possible. We've got a lot of work to do, ladies and gentlemen, and you know we've got to do work with fewer resources. We have an unprecedented number of judicial vacancies that cause my colleagues to work themselves far beyond anything that could reasonably be expected. It adds another layer to the complexity of the job for the chief judge and the court. But as I sit here tonight in front of you, I want you to know I'm confident. I'm confident because I know about the court's willingness and ability to meet challenges. I'm confident about the contributions that you as partners, members of the justice community, will add to the court as we go about our business. I know that we can get this done, and I'm confident that if I'm the next chief judge, that you'll all collaborate, we'll all work, and we're going to be proud of the result that we achieve together.
Thank you, Your Honors. Now we'll move into the first round of questions. Each judge will have up to 2 minutes to respond to the same questions, and we've alternated the order of responses. For the first question, Judge Lee will start. Judge Lee, how do you plan to deal with significant resource limitations, including the high number of judicial vacancies, shortage of court-appointed attorneys, and several proposed budget cuts amid increasingly high demands on our court system?
It's obviously going to be the biggest priority of the next chief judge. And I often hear people talk about we have to think outside the box. I'm going to suggest to everyone here, we've got to start thinking like there is no box. We've got to look at calendars. We've got to figure out what works for the number of judges that we have so we can dispense justice the best way we can. We have created incredibly high expectations because we are good at what we do, but we also need to be mindful of the limitations that we have. And one of the obvious impacts is sooner or later, we just can't keep up the pace, and we have to recognize that. And so we're going to have to reconfigure calendars. We're going to have to talk to the justice partners, and we're going to have to help them understand the limitations that we're operating under. But we also have to recognize this. At some point, it just takes a personal toll on everyone. And we all just need to figure out a way to come together, to be supportive of each other, to make sure that the community understands the situation that we're in. The public trust has to be something that we hold dear to us. And so we are going to undertake whatever it takes in terms of calendar management, judicial resource realignment, connection with partners, so that all of the judges, the staff, and everyone connected with Superior Court knows that we're putting everything into our efforts to make this work with less. And we've got to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, caseloads are up. This is not going to get easier for us. It's going to become more difficult. And we're going to have to work together to get through this period.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Judge DeMayo, what are your plans to address the unprecedented judicial vacancies and budget cuts and demands on the court's resources?
So thank you for the question. And the issue of vacancies obviously has been pressing on the court for a number of years. We're at a 20% vacancy rate among the associate judges. Luckily, our magistrate judges don't have to go through the same process, so we're able to fill those positions. And a lot of credit has to go to our magistrate judges who have really filled a lot of gaps that would otherwise exist for the associate judges. In terms of the associate judges are working twice and 3 times as hard. Just to give you an example, in the civil division, which just some years ago had a caseload of about 250 cases, is each of the judges has a caseload over 400 cases. And we're having that same challenge in all of our divisions. For example, in the criminal division, which I'm the presiding judge of, we have 3 less judges than what we should have. And this is at a time when crime rates are high and there's a lot of pressure on the court to do what's right according to the Constitution and the law, but we're under this deep pressure. So one of the things I plan to do if I were to become chief judge is to work very closely with our outside stakeholders and our internal folks who can work the process. Before I became a judge, one of the issues I worked on at MALDEF was actually judicial vacancies. So I'm very familiar with the legislative process and working with the White House and Congress on these issues. So I would work through those procedures the same as I did before becoming a judge, but do so within the judicial ethics that I'm allowed to do. Also, I'm looking to reinvent how we do our business. For example, one of the ideas I have is right now we handle post-conviction motions across the board among all associate judges on all divisions. This creates a burden on the judges. I'm looking to create, hopefully, a proposal to create a unit where we could have specialized attorneys working on these issues so that we can more effectively use our time.
Thank you, Judge DeMayo.
Thank you.
Moving forward to check question 2, what forms of community engagement are going to be prioritized while you are chief? For example, do you think the court's leadership should be coming into the community? If so, how will you do that in practice? If not, what are the other ways you can both share with and receive important information from residents or key court partners and stakeholders? First, Judge DeMayo.
Thank you for the question. This issue of engaging with the community has been a priority of mine since joining leadership. Of course, the pandemic caused a situation where we couldn't engage as much as we wanted to with the community. But as we've come out of the pandemic, and even with the pressing caseloads, I put a priority on engaging with the community, for example, in the criminal division. I've gotten our judges out into the community. We went to the places where people are housed, whether it's at the DC jail or at St. Elizabeth's. We talked to the defendants who are housed there to find out how the programs are going. We also engaged with the CSOSA programs out in the community to find out what types of support programs are there. But even beyond that, I've connected our judges with community members. By example, I took all of our criminal judges out to Anacostia High School, and we met with the high school principal to discuss some of the challenges the students there face. In addition, I had our judges meet with violence interrupters in the community in Southeast so that they could discuss with us the challenges, what motivated them to first get involved in that work, what communities they're working in, and what the court can do better. So I think it's a mutual activity that I would prioritize. One, getting our judges out into the community, receiving information that will inform us and have us do a better job. But also under our current chief judge, there is a committee on public education that was established. It's been very well received by the community. Through that committee, which is headed by Judge Brandt, who's here, as well as Judge Williams, they have brought in hundreds of middle school students from Southeast and have allowed us, the judges, the staff of the court, to meet with middle school students from different schools. For example, I met with the kids from Kramer Middle School and discussed with them the opportunities for future jobs.
Thank you, Judge DeMayo. Judge Lee, what forms of community engagement are you going to prioritize while you're chief?
In 2018, I was fortunate enough to become the chair of the Sentencing Commission here in the District of Columbia. And one of the first things that I thought was just critically important for us is that we had to get to a point where we were engaging the community out in the community. One of the things that you have to recognize about the criminal justice system, and particularly the Superior Court, most people come to Superior Court not because they really want to. They come because something brings them down there. And so the model that we developed at the Sentencing Commission is one that I would like to also use in the Superior Court. This year, the Sentencing Commission will go out to more than 20 events where we will engage with the community. We actually hired an individual to do nothing but community engagement. And it gives the folks in the community an opportunity to see us, to talk to us, where they're comfortable discussing the things that are important to us. We as a court, we've got to do the same thing. We have got to get out of the comfort zone of 500 Indiana Avenue and develop a comfort zone in each of the wards of the city. If we can engage people, we're going to become better judges. We're going to become a better institution. We're going to have a greater sensitivity for what really matters for people. And we have to get comfortable with the notion that sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. And so, Chief, when you develop the program to bring kids in, we're going to figure out a way to expand that. Not every kid that comes down to visit us is going to be a lawyer or a judge. but we've got a whole host of important people that work in our courthouse that have made careers out of working in the justice field. We should be introducing kids to all of that, expanding our programs so that they and their parents get a sense of what the Superior Court is really about. And it's not just that jury summons that you get every 24 months.
Amen. Moving on to question 3. Many important court functions involve external stakeholders. For example, legal service organizations provide resource centers for unrepresented parties in a few divisions. Lawyers and bar entities work with judicial officers and the court staff to draft updated court rules. Volunteer guardians ad litem provide legal and factual insights in domestic relation cases. The criminal division requires close and frequent engagement with the U.S. Attorney, CJAs, and the Public Defender Service to run effectively. These are just some examples of court collaborators. How will you work with these groups, as well as the DC Council and the Mayor, to ensure the effective administration of justice at DC Superior Court? First, Judge Lee.
It's always important for us to have relationships, and we have to work at those relationships. Part of my career has been in the system so entrenched that I've gotten to know people in just about every corner of it. I'm a member of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, the organization that brings all stakeholders together. I've got relationships with those folks. I hope that we are in a position where we get to reset relationships, but then we also focus on how we extend and expand those relationships. Not long ago, met with the City Council to talk about sentencing issues. Those are relationships that we have. I told you in the opening statement that the Superior Court is great, but we are not great alone. We're great because we have those relationships, we benefit from those relationships, and we start to implement decisions and policies that make justice better, fairer for everyone across the city. One of the great things that happened as the outgrowth of the pandemic is we actually reimagined a court. Judge Josie Herring connected with just about every stakeholder we could. We listened to them. And then we started to incorporate their suggestions into how we go about the business of the court. We have the relationships. We've got to solidify the relationships and continue to expand on those relationships. And there is no idea, ladies and gentlemen, that's a bad idea. We need to hear from you. When we have warts and we don't do well, you need to let us know that we don't do well. That's how we do better. And when we do well, you know, we all have a little bit of ego. We want to know about that too.
Judge DeMayo, how do you see yourself communicating and collaborating with key external stakeholders?
The court will not be successful unless we work with and alongside all of these stakeholders that have been named by you. Whether it's nonprofit organizations, legal services organizations, governmental organizations, whether it's the DC Council or the Mayor. Obviously, with regard to the organizations that regularly appear in our court, we have already, through the presiding judges, the ability to meet on a regular basis with all of these groups. And in fact, while presiding judge of the criminal division and when I was deputy presiding judge of the probate and tax divisions, we met regularly and continue to meet regularly with all of our stakeholder organizations. And this is a two-way conversation. It is not the judges telling the stakeholders this is what's going to happen. It's a conversation. It's a two-way conversation where we listen to the issues that they're raising. Just to give an example, I see Mr. Baldwin in the room here, and he's the head of SCAT law, and there's been some issues with regard to shortages of CJA attorneys, and we're working together. We recently had a town hall, and the CJA panel members said, here are some of our ideas. And what we did, Judge Brand and myself, is we have implemented those ideas because they're great ideas that we're open to, and that's the same type of model I would have as chief judge. With regard to the DC Council and the Mayor, I've had the opportunity to meet a number of the members of the council as well as the Mayor through a number of different forums. And I believe I've established a good relationship with those members as well. We have to remind everyone what the role of the court is. We are the third branch of government, and sometimes we have to explain that not to the council or not to the mayor, but sometimes to the public. But these are working partners, and we will not be successful unless we work together, and that would be my plan as Chief Judge.
Thank you. Question 4. Much of the work around reforming court processes or rules happen at the division level as opposed to court-wide. For example, a generally applicable reform or strategy might be pursued in one area of the court, but not another. What is your philosophy on court change process? Should changes happen within divisions under the guidance of the presiding judges, or would you approach court-wide planning that would institute common approaches more broadly? If yes, how would you accomplish that as a practical matter? Judge DeMayo?
So your question really calls for an answer that it has to be both. We have certain programs, say for example, access to justice issues, where we have to look court-wide at those issues. Are we making, for example, our court forums accessible to people who have limited English proficiency? Are we making those forums accessible to people who have limited education? And that has to be a court-wide process to evaluate forms as one example of access to justice across the board. In terms of the hybrid aspects of this, there are certain procedures and policies that are particularly applicable to the division. And so those are going to be decisions made at the division level. But let me be clear, we work in coalition with all of our stakeholder groups to determine what should be the policies and procedures. Some of the players you mentioned earlier, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Public Defender's Service, the CJA panel, we meet with them when we are putting processes into place in the criminal division, and the similar processes happen, for example, in the civil division for civil procedures. So it has to be both. One, access to justice must be across the board, and we need to make sure we're meeting very high standards on that. But two, there are certain procedures that are only applicable to a division, and at that point, that division needs to go forward with that. We should also look at divisions as places where experiments and pilots can happen, because sometimes, say for example, the Domestic Violence Division might develop a protocol or procedure that's successful, and then we can then use it in other divisions. So I think we are most successful when we use both, hybrid in terms of across the board in the court, as well as at the division level.
Judge Lee?
So I'm going to add really another layer to that, because I completely agree it is this hybrid approach. But I think we also have to be comfortable with having outside stakeholders talk to us about what we do, how we do it, and how we can improve it. And so we constantly look at processes within the court. When I was the presiding judge in the criminal division, we made it a point to try to revamp criminal discovery. And we could only do that because we developed a consensus between the defense bar and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we actually went through a process that has just made a fundamental change in the way that we do business. That works perfectly for the criminal division. Doesn't work in other places. In the court, we have to recognize that. We heard from outside individuals, actually the Council for Court Excellence, and they asked us to examine our jury plan and how we were impacting returning citizens. I sat down with a group of individuals, both inside and outside of the court. We took that recommendation and we actually changed the process. We changed the jury plan so that returning citizens can now serve on jurors much quicker than they ever could before. That is just one example of how we can bring outside information in to help us do better on the inside, while we're still examining everything that we need to look at division-wide and court-wide internally.
Thank you. Next question. DC juries do not currently reflect the demographics of our community. For the past 2 years, the group of people coming to Superior Court after being summoned for pettit jury service have been approximately 30% Black people in a city that is 45% Black. Do you see this as a problem, and what would you propose should be done about it? Start with Judge Lee.
So I spent many years as the chair of the jury committee, and we looked at issues like this pretty regularly. Ladies and gentlemen, I think part of what you're seeing in those statistics is just the fundamental change of what the city looks like these days. And we have to understand that that change will probably continue across the landscape. And so as a court, we've got to make sure that when we're reaching out to the community and we're summoning jurors, we're actually reaching out in a way that is effectively connecting every section of the city, and we're drawing the cross section that we should be drawing. We've actually undertaken steps to make jury service a little better for everyone so that perhaps it's not so polarizing. My goal in the end is that you'll get a jury summons and you'll actually be happy about it. Okay, so maybe I went too far, all right? But the point is, we've got to be sensitive to this type of issue. And we've got to make sure that what we're doing inside the courthouse is designed to make sure that we are drawing the cross section of the city. We're not missing people just because they're somehow under the radar. They're not otherwise connected. That's our obligation, ladies and gentlemen. We have to take that on, and we have to make sure that jury service is something that just is not crushing for individuals, so that they actually get the summons, they accept the summons, and hopefully in the end, they look forward to coming down and visiting us. We've got to look at this, we've got to continue to look at it, and we cannot hesitate to be afraid to act on it.
Judge DeMayo?
So there's ongoing litigation on this issue, so I won't comment on the ongoing litigation, but I will comment more generally about the disconnect in terms of public trust between communities of color and the court systems. Across the country, what we have seen, and DC is no different, that already public trust of the court systems between communities of color and the court were decreased in comparison to majority communities, the white community, and it's only gotten worse for a variety of reasons, including relationships between the police force in different jurisdictions and communities of color. So in order to tackle this more broad problem of connecting communities of color to be able to feel that they can come and serve as jurors and do so willingly and excitedly, I think the court has to do a lot more with regard to outreach into communities of color. In addition, if you are low income, I've been presiding over jury trials for many years, and there is a huge barrier to service if you are low income. I have so many people who actually make it into the courtroom and they say, I cannot serve that length of time because I can't afford it. I will not be able to pay my rent. I will not be able to feed my children. So we have to look at these issues much more broadly as a society, and working with the council and the mayor to find how we can bridge these gaps. One of the ideas I have, just in terms of bridging the gap of trust, is to do more work with media outlets that are working within communities of color. This is a lot of what I did when I was at MALDEF, working at that time with Latino media outlets, African American media outlets, and doing more outreach to the communities through the venues that they trust, and going into communities that way they can gain more trust of the court, so they're willing to come forward.
Thank you. Next question. Superior Court has high levels of pro se or unrepresented litigants in most divisions. The rates range between 97% of plaintiffs in small estate matters and between 85 to 97% of respondents in family court, paternity and child support, and landlord and tenant matters. Of course, it will always be a goal to secure as much legal representation as possible for these litigants, but until we have full civil get-in, resources will not likely be adequate to meet the current need. What changes And those changes within the court's control are needed to allow us to better serve the thousands of unrepresented litigants who access the court. Put another way, what ideas, scheduling or otherwise, do you have about how to make improvements in high volume calendars that regularly see a high proportion of unrepresented litigants? First, Judge DeMayo.
So there's a couple of issues to respond. One is just how the courtroom itself is structured and set up. And one is staggering the hearings definitely helps in these courtrooms. In addition, the ability for individuals to appear remotely has significantly helped with regard to access to justice. Just to give one example, in landlord-tenant court, where it used to be, if you ever appeared there pre-pandemic, it was a huge courtroom, hundreds of people, and cases were called, and about 20% of those cases ended up in default. The pandemic occurred, and we went virtual in many of our courts. And it turned out, as a side effect of going virtual, we now have a default rate of less than 1%. It's huge to have access to justice through that. So those are some of the issues to consider. But I also want to mention there's a lot of innovation going on at the court, and that innovation is in conjunction with many of you who are here in the room today and many of the partners that we work with in the community. We do have, as set up by our chief judge, a number of initiatives. We have a committee on pro bono and affordable counsel, which is working to increase the pro bono counsel and affordable counsel. But as you mentioned, this is not the only solution. There's also now set up by the two chief judges and the executive officer, a civil legal regulatory reform task force, which is looking at more creative ways to provide legal services and access to legal information to people who are self-represented. We also have a couple of people here. I saw them earlier this evening from our court staff, Jody Feldman, our pro bono program manager, and Aaron Larkin, our director for the Access to Justice Unit. And they're really going to be there to help us find new ways to have access to justice for these self-represented individuals.
Thank you. Judge Lee, what ideas do you have about how to better support unrepresented litigants in high volume calendars?
I spent the early part of my career on child support calendars, where almost every non-custodial parent was unrepresented. And we recognized that we could do better and we should do better. We've worked through this notion of going to hybrid service and remote technology, and it's just had a phenomenal impact on how people connect with the court. And so when you hear the data about how we've reduced defaults, it is nothing short of phenomenal. But there is another piece to that. We have a number of people connecting to us by technology, virtually, but it means they're really kind of less connected to the physical plant of the courthouse. And so the ability for them to connect with the clerk's office is just not as easy as it used to be, where they could walk down the hall. And so I think we've got to increase the usage of navigators so that we can get people down to the courthouse, get them to the right location, so that we can actually engage in an outreach for individuals. Folks should not be appearing virtually and saying, I really don't know what to do next. They shouldn't be paralyzed by the absence of information. There are discussions about using non-lawyers to help and assist people work through the process. We need to investigate that. We need to look at that, and we need to see if we can do a better job of getting people to where they need to be, so that their self-representation experience is not fundamentally different than the experience they would have if they had a lawyer with them. And that's a partnership, ladies and gentlemen, that we all have to invest in. Every single one of the stakeholders and the court. We've got to recognize where we are, and we can't be afraid to act.
So we're going to move forward. We're going to change the topic a little bit. Given the financial crisis the Public Defender Service is currently experiencing, how will you support the Criminal Justice Act, or CJA, panel attorneys, as they are called upon to assist the court during this time? How can the court help to address the disparity in training, support, resources, and caseload sizes? What ideas do you have regarding the billable cap and hourly rates for CJAs? Judge Lee?
So a lot of it is really budget driven. But let me start by saying this about our CJA lawyers. They're some of the best partners that we have. They are an invaluable piece of the criminal justice process for us. We can't do it without you. I recognize that we are asking a lot of you right now. I've been around so long that I remember when the CJA bar had 600 and something people in it. They came down to pick up cases on Monday and sold real estate on Tuesday. We have been able to move away from that model, and what we have created is a panel of lawyers that are just good lawyers. They do quality work. They make the system work better than ever. So we've got to value that relationship. We've got to address the concerns that they have raised. Obviously, some of it is budget driven. But part of what I think we all need to do is we've got to start recruiting lawyers to join the CJA ranks. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with our CJA colleagues. We need to go out to law schools. We need to go to law firms. We need to get the people who were not fortunate enough like me to go to the public defender and have an institution behind me. If I didn't have that, I'd been too afraid to do CJA work. And we need to make sure that we're building bridges with folks so that they can come in and do the work, not feel so isolated. And we've got to be creative. And when the budget opportunity comes, we need to be able to make the commitment to try to address the increase in caseloads, the impact it's having on our CJA lawyers, so that we can make sure that the quality of representation always remains high, that people enjoy the work, and they're not fleeing just because we're beating them down with court cases. This has to be a joint effort, ladies and gentlemen, and my commitment to you is I'm prepared to go out in the community, whatever community will have us, talk about the virtues of working in the courthouse, being a CJA lawyer, joining the ranks, and actually having a direct impact on the quality of justice here in the District of Columbia.
Judge DeMayo, how can we better support the CJA panel attorneys and address the disparities?
Well, first, I just want to compliment with the highest compliments the CJA panel, because I've had the opportunity to work with the members for many years, and they are dedicated public servants who are representing indigent clients, and they're doing really tough work in our community. They're going out to the jail every day. They're going out to the community every day. They're meeting with the family members who have concerns with what's happening in the criminal justice system. So the work they do is so hard and so complex. So I give them huge kudos for the work that they do and the service they do for our community. I want to talk a little bit about where we are now and some future ideas. Where we are now is that we are making changes already. For example, on these issues of raising the cap and raising hourly wages, the Joint Committee, of which I'm a member of, did already vote once recently to do those raises, because we recognize that the CJA panel members have not received a raise in many years. It is a budget issue, so to the extent that we're going to do it again, we need to look at those issues closely, and as a general matter, we are supportive of the CJA panel members and the work that they're doing. I also want to talk about the recruitment efforts that are going on now. We already have a session set up with our current law clerks, because what better way to recruit new CJA lawyers than from our law clerks? Two of my law clerks are here in the front row, David and Rajana. So, they're among the young people who can be public servants in our community. In addition, I wanted to add, the younger attorneys have expressed a lot of issues and concerns that I don't think we have yet addressed. And that is, one, working with law schools to create better programs for loan forgiveness. This is a huge barrier for younger attorneys to be able to do this kind of work. They want to do it, they can't afford it. So we need to look for creative solutions on that.
Thank you, Judge DeMayo.
Thank you.
Question 8. What improvements would you propose to ensure that the court is more accessible to limited English proficient people and to people with disabilities. And we'll start with Judge DeMayo.
So these are issues that impact us all the time. I do want to recognize our court managers who are here, Mr. Rusan, Ms. Dempson, and others, Mr. Friend, because they are really leaders in terms of these issues. That is, making sure that barriers are driven down for those kinds of matters. In terms of limited English proficient participants, we actually have an incredibly strong program at the court. We have interpreters on staff for some of the most common languages, that is Spanish, sign language, and also, in addition, some of the other languages that we have. But even if there are other languages that we need interpreters for, our interpreter's office does an excellent job with providing language interpreters. In terms of the people who are hearing impaired, I have been working with the executive side of the court, because one of the services that some people who are hearing impaired ask for is the use of CART services. And we have to make sure that we have a smooth process to make sure that people who don't just use an interpreter, sign language interpreter, but actually need the additional services of a computer with the transcript on it, that there's a seamless process. These are issues I've already been working on in coalition with our executive staff and the staff members. As recently as a few months ago, I called a large meeting with all of the people at the court to make sure that we had good communication, to make sure that those processes happen smoothly. That is an access to justice issue that I've worked on for many decades and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Judge DeMayo. Judge Lee?
You know, we really do a good job at this, and we need to figure out how to even do better. And so we've got an entire office just for interpreter services. They are nothing short of phenomenal. We've got a set of executives that pay close attention to all of this. One of the things that we really should focus on is, first of all, making sure that all of our documents are available for people who can understand it for the language that they rely on. Number two, we need to be able to communicate with the community so that they understand that there will not be language barriers when they come down to the courthouse. They'll be able to find documents that'll help them understand the process, that there are resources available inside the building, that we're going to be respectful and sensitive to the needs. We're going to avoid barriers that make it difficult or frightening for them to come down and join us. We do all of that now, but we can do it even more. One of the things I just think we have to work on is how we communicate and how we address the community. And over at the Sentencing Commission, we started using Instagram to communicate to people. I never thought we would do it, I swear. I didn't think we could, but it just reaches people where they are. We have the ability to do that on the interpreter issue, the language issue as well. We've got incredible services available, but it doesn't really make people feel good about the process if we don't make them aware of what we're prepared to do to make the process responsive to them.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Next question. We know that many people who appear in Superior Court as defendants, plaintiffs, victims, and witnesses have significant trauma histories. Unfortunately, experiences that bring them to court may be directly related to those traumas or can exacerbate them. How have you demonstrated a trauma-informed approach in the courtroom? What will you do to ensure that judges receive the care and support they need to maintain a sense of compassion and to create a trauma-informed atmosphere in their courtrooms? And what other types of trainings would benefit our courts, judges, and staffs? Judge Lee?
And so it shouldn't really be a surprise to you. We train on it, and we train on it regularly. And it's not just the judges, it's the administrators and the core staff. I believe just last year we had a session in our managers training on this very subject matter. And it is critically important that we grasp this and understand it. I said to you, many people come down to visit us, and they're not coming because they want to. They're coming because something's happened in their lives that make the court necessary. All the judges have to be sensitive to this, but it means the entire court has to be sensitive to it as well. In Secure DC, there's actually funding made available for extended services for people. We have an entire office that helps with benefits for people, the victims of crime, the victims of incidents that impact their lives. We need to make sure that we're communicating all that to the public so that they know it's there. The Secure DC Act does something that we never thought it was ever going to do, but it provides funding. And so when people come down and they actually do need services, we need to be able to direct them and navigate them toward those services. And we need to make sure that judges, staff members, and our executives, we all get impacted by what we see also. And sometimes we need to take a break. We need to sit back and we need to decompress so that we make sure that we're being respectful, we're being decent, and we're being sensitive to the people and the issues that they bring to us. Because that's what they expect from us. And if we're going to pay attention to public trust, if we're going to continue to earn public trust, then there's a certain level of decency that we always have to maintain. And that cannot be something that is negotiable.
Judge DeMayo?
I agree that the issue of trauma-informed service as a judge has been an issue that we have been trained on, but there's never going to be enough training for us. And so we need to continue that training on a regular basis. The model that was developed in the Domestic Violence Division when it was developed in the 1990s was a model that looked at these kinds of issues. And in particular, it looked at when victims of particular crimes had to come to court and then go to multiple courts for resolution of related issues. They would come to the criminal court because they were a victim of a domestic violence crime. They would go to the CPO court because they wanted a civil protection order. Then they had to go to the family court because they needed child support or child visitation hours set up. And so the model of the Domestic Violence Division was a trauma-informed model which tried to reduce how many times a victim of crime of domestic violence had to appear in different courtrooms and tell their story over and over and over. And so we need to learn from that model and look for other ways to bridge that gap to make sure that we're not subjecting, whether it's witnesses or defendants or victims, to that type of retelling of their trauma over and over. Another thing to just keep in mind is when the court has delays, when we don't have timely disposition of our cases, that is another form of trauma on the people who have to keep getting a notice. Your case is not going to be resolved. You're not going to testify today. It's another month. It's another 6 months. So the court needs to prioritize how we look at those types of cases so that we don't have significant delays at the same time that we have a high vacancy rate. So you can see this is very challenging for the court, but we need to be sensitive to it.
Next question. Last month, CCE released a report commissioned by the Office of the DC Auditor on crossover youth. That is, youth who have had cases in both the juvenile and child welfare systems, sometimes simultaneously, but sometimes asynchronous, I can't say it, and sometimes not simultaneously. Records show that there were many more crossover youth than are currently being counted or treated as a special population by the district's government. As you both know, a 2001 law and a 2009 order calls for implementation of the one family, one judge principle to the extent practical, feasible, and lawful. What steps as Chief Judge would you take to ensure that the family court is following the one family, one judge rule to the greatest extent possible? And how, as Chief Judge, how would you promote the different court divisions including the Family Court and the Social Services Division, and relevant agencies' participation and leadership in efforts to create a more unified and collaborative approach to crossover youth in the district. Judge DeMayo.
So I appreciated the CCE's looking into and revealing some of the challenges that crossover youth do face, whether it's simultaneous, as you say, they're in the CFSA system and also being charged as juvenile delinquents, or if it's sequential. And these are issues, first of all, that the data, as CCE points out, needs to be better collected and better shared. That's a key point, because we're not going to be able to really serve these youth at the court unless we know who they are. Another thing the court can do, and as Chief Judge, I would support this, is we can be a convener of the different agencies that are involved in these issues to see how the court can better serve these youth. Obviously, based on the study that was done by CCE, there's a high percentage of crossover between these two populations. And the court may not always have a role. This is the point I made earlier. We are the judicial branch, the third branch of government, and sometimes these issues are more appropriate, say, for example, with the Office of the Attorney General or CFSA or DYRS. And these are, but the court could play a role as a convener to find solutions. And as for whether the court can restructure, it's just a question of looking at the statute to see what is permissible under the statute. But I would be open and flexible to proposals that are within the confines of the statute to make sure that we're serving these youth who really have double challenges, already challenges in their family homes, and then as a direct connection to it, getting arrested as charged with juvenile delinquency.
Judge Lee.
One of the wonderful things about this piece of data is that we actually know it's a bigger problem than is suggested by the document. And so the family court and the chief judge of the superior court, I think, have a huge role in this. And every year inside family court, there's an annual training where all the stakeholders come together. Everybody's in the room talking about the issues that impact families and children. This document gives us the ability as a court to put that on the agenda. That should be the training session. And we should walk out of that training session understanding that we've got a concern. Coming out of that training session with a set of principles, best practices, tasks for all of us to do, not just the court, ladies and gentlemen, all stakeholders, so that we address this across the board. And then we actually follow up on it. We do a lot in the city about gathering data. At some point, we've got to gather the data, we've got to act on it, and then we've got to follow up and police ourselves to make sure we're actually doing what we say we're supposed to do. And when we have a weak partner, then we need to recognize we have a weak partner, and we need to figure out how we come together to support that partner. Because we can talk all day long about it. At some point, we have to get past talking, and we've got to get to solutions. And so I think this family training opportunity in the family court is the perfect place for us to begin those discussions, but to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable, including ourselves, about the commitments we make to the youth. Those are the youth that deserve the best that we have to give them.
Thank you so much, Your Honors. I'm going to give you each 3 minutes for final statements, but I want to thank you for being candid and thoughtful in your responses. I think that we've all been informed about your views and what you see as the vision for the court, and no matter what happens, we're going to be in great hands as we have been traditionally. So with that, I'll now give you each 3 minutes for final statements. Judge Lee, please go first.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've gotten a sense of who I am. And I hope you have a sense of the vision that I hope to offer if I'm the chief judge. We have a lot of work to do. There's no question about it. We can get it done. We can get it done because we're going to make the commitment. We're going to develop the relationships. We're going to expand relationships and we're going to engage the community in a way that's going to be beneficial to us all. We're going to move beyond discussions, and we're going to start taking action. What my career demonstrates to all who examine it is that I've worked in systems. I've worked to change systems, and when necessary, I've created new systems, all designed to make sure that we provide the very best justice we can, fair, efficient, and equitable. We do that because we listen to our partners in the community. When they asked us to change the jury plan, we did it. When you talk to us about staggering calendars, ladies and gentlemen, we staggered like we've never staggered before. Landlord and tenant is no longer what it used to be. There's no cattle call in the morning. Child support, there's no cattle call in the morning. It's because we heard you, and we need to continue to do that. When we took a critical look at child support, we gave your father in court, a nationally recognized program that changed the lives of children and families, because dads do make a difference. That is the type of effort that I've spent my career doing, and I'll continue to do it as Chief Judge. Our community deserves to know about all the wonderful things that we do in the courthouse: the Marriage Bureau, Hope Court, Mental Health Court, Drug Treatment Court. There's success stories that occur every single day, and the citizens deserve to know about it so they get a good feeling about the work that we're all doing. I understand that I look at data and it says that crime is down and we're doing better on public safety. I think most citizens just don't feel that way at the moment. We need to recognize our commitment to public safety, while we also balance, ladies and gentlemen, the need to respect the presumption of innocence so that the outcomes that we have are just and they're fair. There was a time a colleague said to me, you sound optimistic. I am optimistic. The Superior Court is not just an institution. It's a living, breathing body of judges, managers, people, partners, and community members. We can improve what we do because we work together. I'm Judge Milton Lee. I want to be the next Chief Judge because the commitment that I'm going to make to you and these citizens is the type of commitment that this city deserves. I'm not just a resident here, I'm a native, and my life has been committed to making this place the best that it can be, and that's the type of Chief Judge that I'm going to be.
Thank you, Judge Lee. Judge DeMayo?
Yes, well, first let me extend a thanks to Karen Evans for serving as a superb moderator. I want to also thank CCE again and the co-sponsors for tonight's event. I do want to thank all of you in the audience who have taken time tonight to listen to us talk about our vision for the court. Your very presence here today means that we share a commitment to make the Superior Court the best court in the country. I do want to thank my law clerks who I mentioned earlier, David and Regina, who are here. One of my former law clerks, Erica Sword, is here, so thank you for coming. I do want to thank the staff who are assisting behind the scenes, whether it's the setup, the breakdown, or the cleanup crews. I also want to thank my family. My wife, Angela, is here. My daughter, Milan, is here. My son, Santiago, is not here because he's out camping in the wilderness and he does not have his iPhone with him. So that's a major accomplishment. Anyone who puts the public's interest first knows that that commitment is not just about self-sacrifice by the public servant, but it is also a sacrifice by the family who stands beside them. If selected as the next Chief Judge, I commit to you I would continue my passion to create a more just and fair society for all members of our community who come into contact with the court, no matter what their background is. I will work tirelessly with each and every one of you here and with those who are not here to create a collegial environment, whether it is among judges, managers, or staff, or with our partners and stakeholder agencies. I understand that consensus building is the key to success. I will not wait for you to raise your voice or to raise your hand. I will seek out your input to make sure that all voices are heard. I will do everything in my power to make the court accessible to all who enter its doors. And by access, I mean removing barriers to the building, barriers to the process, barriers to understanding and full participation. I will operate under the highest ethical standards. You can be confident that I will do what is right, even if it is difficult. I will always ask what is in the best interest of the court and the DC community. I will follow that path no matter how hard it is. I hope you have a better sense of who I am as a person and as a judge, and what you could expect if I were given the honor to serve as Chief Judge. We live in an imperfect world, but together, if we keep our eyes on the prize, we will continue to build upon the progress made by our ancestors who fought for equality and justice. There is no better vision than that has been chosen for our court. Open to all, trusted by all, justice for all. Thank you.
Just give us 1 second, please.
I'll hang out. Yeah. Yeah. I'll give it.
Okay.
I'm not going that way.
Please.
Just wanted to respect our candidates this evening. We had about 10 minutes early, and that's always a blessing to have a little bit of time. So they've been gracious enough to say that they'll stay in the lobby and we can enjoy each other's company. There's some amazing people in the audience. Give our flowers to the Chief Judge here, and also have a few moments to speak to these amazing candidates. Thank you to our Judicial Nomination Commission chairs that I see here tonight too. So great group of people in the room to stay and talk with. So we'll keep the space open for about 15, 20 more minutes.